Thanks very much. You can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, we'll get started. So thanks so much for having me here today. I've been asked to reshare a presentation I first prepared for the National Depression Glass Association for an online presentation back last year in February. That was designed as an introduction and overview of Dominion Glass Company for their largely American audience. And I know that many folks here with Glasfax will be quite familiar with Dominion, so I've made some edits, keeping some of the overview but going into a little bit less detail. You will be aware, of course, that Dominion was among Canada's longest lasting and largest glass producers. And this is a photo from the 50s taken from the Sydenham River in Wallaceburg, Ontario, which is the Dominion plant that we are usually most interested in for the purposes of glass collecting. I'm joining you today from Edmonton. Edmonton is known to the Plains Cree people as a Miskwichi-Waskahikan, meaning Beaver Hills House. It is part of Treaty 6 territory, as you can see from this map of Canada's numbered treaties between Indigenous peoples and the British Crown. It is also the homeland of the Métis people, and I live on lands that are in the Fort Edmonton Métis district. I've had the privilege of making a life here on these lands for the last 14 years, and I'm committed to living in relationship with the diverse Indigenous peoples who make this place home and who have connections to this place since time immemorial. We'll come back to some maps in a minute as they're part of telling the story of Dominion Glass. So Dominion Glass existed in its first form starting approximately 1886 when the Barcelou family of Montreal opened a glass plant locally and eventually hired a plant manager from America's Glass Country in Steubenville, Ohio. This company made bottles, jars, and perhaps other items. This first version of Dominion Glass was eventually absorbed into Diamond Glass Company by 1898. Diamond was one of Canada's main glass companies of the EAPG era. The Dominion Glass Company reemerged in 1913 through merging of the Diamond Glass Company and the Sydenham Glass Company of Wallaceburg. So Diamond Glass became also known as a Diamond Flint Glass Company in 1902. They produced commercial and kitchen type glass such as fruit sealers as well as tableware in EAPG styles, some unique to the Canadian market and some adaptations or copies of popular US patterns. Sydenham Glass was named after the Sydenham River, which flows through Wallaceburg. Sydenham Glass had its origins as part of the town's economic development planning in 1881, but didn't start full production, it said, until 1895. By 1908, the factory made bottles, lamp and lantern chimneys, lantern globes, fruit jars, and tumblers. This is a photo of the new house built in 1908 to house the first Owens automatic bottling machines to be used in Canada. This photo dates from approximately 1910. One of the items produced at Sydenham Glass before and after the merger into Dominion was the gem canning jar. Gem jars are uniquely Canadian with a distinctive lid larger than the standard canning jar but smaller than a wide mouth lid. As mentioned, Dominion Glass was created when Diamond Flint Glass merged with Sydenham Glass in 1913. This was reportedly as part of the reorganized company's commitment to machine production of glassware. With its formation, Dominion acquired the exclusive rights to the Owens automatic bottle machines in Canada. The merger included 8 plants that have been operating under Diamond, as well as the Sydenham Wallaceburg plant. There were some initial consolidations in the teens and some new openings in the 1920s. A 1925 inventory of all plants and production molds indicated Dominion was making bottles, jars, tableware, lamps, lantern globes, and a large variety of other glass items such as fire extinguishers, lightning rod balls, fishing floats, doorknobs, headlight lenses, bird feeders, vault lights, insulators, and more. Here's an example of what was being produced in the early Dominion years. This is a crown fruit jar pictured in the catalog on the previous page. And here's the item for sale on eBay. At one point, Dominion had glass plants in 6 Canadian cities and towns across 4 provinces. Toronto and Montreal had multiple plants at some points. By 1925, there was a move to consolidate and focus production. Machine production was concentrated at the Montreal Point St. Charles plant, Hamilton plant, Wallaceburg for bottles, and Redcliffe, Alberta. Hand manufactured continued at Montreal's Delormier plant, the 2 Toronto plants at Parkdale and Carlaw Avenue, and at Wallaceburg. The eventual objective was to gradually move all hand production and specialty production to Wallaceburg while still retaining at that plant enough machine production to do bottles to serve the Southwestern Ontario market. By the end of World War II, Dominion had consolidated to 4 main plants in 3 provinces. The Great Depression appeared to help hasten this as well. For instance, the Carlaw Avenue plant in Toronto was noted as sold off to another manufacturing company in 1931. One source indicates Dominion hit a low point economically in 1933, but this drove innovation. By 1937, they had invested in a fully automated raw materials batch handling system at the Hamilton plant. After World War II, machine production resumed at all 4 plants, and some plants had their specialties within that scope. By 1958, Dominion added a new plant at Burnaby to serve British Columbia, and in 1969, they added another modern plant in Brampton. Sources indicate that virtually all tableware production by Dominion was done at the Wallaceburg plant after the 1920s. It also became the center for tumbler and commemorative glass production, supported by investments in ACL, Applied Ceramic Labeling Technology. ACL on glass is a screen printing process that uses ceramic ink to create permanent labels. The labels are durable and resistant to scratches, water, and chemicals. Much of the glassware I'm going to show in the rest of today's presentation comes from the Wallaceburg plant. Wallaceburg's foray into glassmaking came, as was mentioned, as part of efforts by the town founders to diversify and invest in the area's economy, making use of its water access to the Great Lakes and its geographical proximity to major markets in central Canada and to materials in the Great Lakes and Midwestern US. It was also relatively close to the know-how of America's glass country in the Ohio River region. As one example, most of the soda ash used in Wallaceburg came from a mine and production plant in Amherstburg, Ontario, located south of Windsor. I'm going to speak for a few minutes about the Dominion Glass logos, especially those used in the 1920s through mid-century era that we are focused on today. Specialty glassware that was marked tended to use the D in serif font as seen in the lower photo. That included tableware and tumblers. However, less than half of this glass was stamped, in my experience, more often tumblers than other glassware or other tableware. Commercial type glassware, including bottles, canning jars, and various kinds of glass used for kitchen gadgets, tended to use the familiar Diamond D mark. The Diamond D mark originated after 1927, when the US, during Prohibition, started requiring imported glass containers to be stamped with marks denoting their origin. Around that time, Canada or Made in Canada was also stamped on, for example, most glass bottles. Through the 40s to 50s, a coding system was used along with the Diamond D, where you can identify the quarter and year of production and also which of the 4 plants made the item based on placement of a dot around the diamond. One issue is that date codes were reused eventually, so sometimes you can narrow it down to 2 or 3 possible years. There are some good internet resources that explain this further, so I'll leave it at that for now. So let's follow along the story of Dominion. Production expanded after the war with the overall growth in the economy and Canada's population. Commercial glass and consumer products such as tableware, specialty glass items, commemorative and souvenir items made of glass all became popular. However, pain points started to appear by the 1960s on the commercial side with competition from plastics. At first, Dominion diversified, adding baby food in glass jars in 1962, for instance. However, in 1965, plastic non-refundable soft drink bottles hit the market in Canada. Between the 50s and 70s, international mergers, consolidations, and buyouts hit North American glass production. For Dominion Glass, international conglomerate Consolidated Bathurst, based in the lumber and pulp and paper business, took stock control in 1974, and with a full merger, the company's name changed to Dom Glass in 1976. After the merger into Consolidated Bathurst in 1976, several of the glass plants were sold off. So let's follow their fate. If we fast forward from 1976 to 1989, Dom Glass merged with its main Canadian competitor, Consumers Glass, and the Montreal plant in Point St. Charles was integrated as a Consumers plant. By 2001, a bankrupt Consumers Glass company was bought by US-based Owens, Illinois, which is today the world's largest producer of glass containers. The Montreal plant continues to produce glass to the tune of 2.5 million glass containers every 24 hours. Hamilton's Dominion plant was a high-tech facility in the context of the community's glass-making industry, which dated back to the 1860s. It was constructed starting in 1912, just prior to Diamond Glass's evolution to Dominion, and following a fire at the previous Hamilton Glass Works. A major expansion and modernization was done in 1955, allowing the plant to output 22 million bottles a year. However, there were a number of major labor disputes from the late 60s to the mid-1980s. By 1988, the plant was part of the merger into Consumers. But in 1997, the plant closed, laying off 400 people, which was considerably down from the over 2,000 that had worked there in the past. Between 2005 and 2007, some Hollywood movies, including Alien Fire and The Incredible Hulk, were actually filmed at the closed site. In 1914, the city of Hamilton acquired the property. Demolition of the main plant was being rushed ahead so the site could be used for 2015 Pan Am Games parking. Remaining buildings on the site were razed by 2021. The Western Canada plant for Dominion opened in 1913 in Redcliffe, Alberta, which is an industrial suburb on the outskirts of Medicine Hat. Medicine Hat is also well known as the site of Alta Glass Decorative and Art Glass, 1950 to 88, as well as Medalta and Highcroft Potteries, 1916 through the late 80s. There was a major expansion at the Redcliffe site in the early 50s to serve the post-war needs for especially commercial glass in Western Canada. Redcliffe produced lots of food and beverage glasses, including the iconic ALCB, Alberta Liquor Control beer glasses, as seen in the photo here, which are a common sight at antique malls and thrift stores in my area. As mentioned, a second Western Canada Dominion plant was added in BC in 1958. This Redcliffe plant closed in 1989 as part of the merger of Dominion Glass into competitor Consumers Glass. The plant was shortly after acquired by a fiberglass manufacturer, which continues at the site, and the last of the two 1950s brick smokestacks at the site was demolished in May 2025. The Wallaceburg plant, which originated as Sydenham in 1895, was acquired and folded into Toledo-based Libby in 1978. It was called the Libby St. Clair plant from 1978 to 1993 and went just by the Libby name from 1993 until the plant's closing in 1999. The remaining buildings were leveled shortly after, with the iconic Batch Tower being imploded on March 5, 2000, as seen in this photograph. The plant was operational for 105 years. A few notes used on the marks used at the former Sydenham plant after the Dominion era. The 4 interlocked circles mark, which is supposed to be a combination of the looped L used by Libby along with an S and C for St. Clair, was used under Libby St. Clair into the 1990s, although there are a few known instances of the Dominion marks, such as the serif font D, continuing to be used after 1978. After 1993, the typical script L script logo of Libby was used, sometimes with the addition of a Canada or Made in Canada stamp, as shown in the bottom photo. And now we're going to do a bit of a survey of glass made by Dominion in the years during and after World War II, with a focus on Dominion's tableware and kitchenware lines that are collectible today and that you might encounter at thrift stores and antique shops in different parts of Canada. Several of the tableware lines you're going to see were well described and documented by Conrad in the Mystery Item email series and in the subsequent article that ran in Glasfax last year, so I would defer to that material for more detail. First, we have kitchen glass like canning jars and mixing bowls. These were produced for virtually the entire time of Dominion's production, including some utilitarian and basic items being produced nearly continuously from the 1920s into the 80s and 90s. This is the 1920 catalog image of the same canning jars that were on the previous slide. Canning jars were made at multiple Dominion plants in early years as there was a strong market locally in all parts of Canada. Here we have a glass jar with the Dom Glass name. That means it was made between 1976 and 1989. These are improved gem canning jars and lids, that unique Canadian design mentioned earlier. And various types of kitchen glass. A lot of the Androck Canada kitchen gadgets that I found used Dominion glass jars as attachments. Some of this was made at Wallaceburg, but I have examples in my collection that we can tell are from Montreal, Hamilton, and Redcliffe, Alberta. And here we have some catalog images of kitchen and restaurant glass from the 1970s Libby St. Clair catalog. So we know these were being made in Wallaceburg at that time. And Dominion made other household items like furniture casters and vanity and powder jars, which you can see here from my collection. And here's the catalog image from the 1940s showing some of these household glass items: casters, percolator tops, bird feeders, and inkwells. Dominion's automated plants, which included Wallaceburg for some bottle manufacturing, made the commercial glass. Almost every consumer good that came in a container in Canada in the years after World War II was found in glass made by Dominion or its main competitor, Consumers. We can see here the fancy bottle with the lid on the left was sold with vanilla. The dog shaker in the front was also sold with children's shampoo. And we have pop bottles, milk bottles, peanut butter jars, food coloring, juice containers, coffee, and more. And continuing with the commercial glass, of course, we have insulators made by Dominion, as well as cobalt blue milk of magnesia bottles, milk glass Pond's cosmetic jar, green carbonated water bottle, and brown medicine bottle. Okay, on to some tableware patterns by Dominion. Probably the most common and well-known Canadian glass pattern from the World War II early mid-century period is this one, Saguenay. Saguenay is named after the river in eastern Quebec, which makes some sense given the Montreal roots of Dominion. This is advertising in French, showing the catalog from 1941. And here's an inventory documentation sheet from 1941 showing the items produced in the clear version, or what they called crystal, C-R-I-S-T-A-L, Saguenay. From our best information, this pattern was made in pastel colors starting by about 1941-42. Here are some photos of my collection showing the variety of pieces in Saguenay. Clearly, Saguenay had the most pieces of the May 1940s patterns. Pastels in Saguenay were selling in newspaper ads by 1942 in blue, salmon pink, mint green, and pale yellow. Dominion referred to these colors in their 1940s documentation as simply pastel blue, pastel green, pastel pink, and pastel yellow. Fewer pieces were made than the clear or crystal, no shakers, and the two-handled small bowls seem to be quite rare. A collector in Quebec I know has some, but I've never seen one. This was a process of applying enamel paints to the items and then refiring them to get the paints to adhere. These lines are quite similar to the US patterns of Rainbowware by Anchor Hawking, which started production in about 1938, and the fired-on platinite made by Hazel Atlas Glass, which started approximately 1936. They will still show wear and show scratches, but it's held up remarkably well for being 80 plus years old. As I said, from our best information, this Saguenay pattern was produced starting in about 1939. There is a story that talks about Dominion getting special permission to import molds for table glassware that was in short supply during World War II, as supplies of items such as British ceramics were cut off. It was noted the molds came from the Toledo Mold Company, who also made molds for US depression glass companies. If you are familiar with depression glass, you might notice the resemblance of Saguenay to Jeannette Glass's homespun pattern. There are also some similarities to another Jeannette pattern called Waffle. Those molds for the Jeannette patterns were also made by Toledo Mold Company for production starting in 1939. Here are some newspaper ads for various years. Oftentimes they referred to the Saguenay pattern by name, so it seems that there was some brand awareness of this line by the general public. These photos were taken at the Wallaceburg Museum. In their collection, they have two pieces in experimental colors, the orange tangerine fired on plate, and also the teacup and saucer in turquoise. I've never seen any other Saguenay pieces in these two colors. However, there are some nondescript glass bowls that I believe were giveaways that are frequently found in these two fired on colors. They are not Saguenay design, but I do suspect that they may be Dominion production since they always seem to be sold by online sellers in Canada or found in Canadian antique stores. Now Hiawatha. This was a sister line to Saguenay. It was only ever produced in clear and crystal, and only in a few mostly serving pieces, creamers and sugars, butter dishes, sherbets, and side plates. Strangely, I've never seen a cup and saucer. My grandparents received a sugar bowl and creamer in this pattern as a wedding gift in 1944 when they got married in rural Quebec. From the same 1941 inventory sheet as the crystal Saguenay shows the Hiawatha pattern, also in crystal. You can see it was described as a three-piece table set. Ian Warner's article in the very first issue of Glass Collector's Digest in 1987 features an article on Dominion's swirl pattern, which goes by the collector's name of Canadian swirl to distinguish it from other swirl patterns by Anchor Hawking and Jeannette Glass, among others. Warner indicated the pattern was started by Dominion as a cereal bowl, which was offered as a premium for a food company. It proved so popular that the line was expanded into many pieces. It grew into Dominion's most complete and probably the longest running line of full tableware. 3 sizes of pitchers, 3 types of bowls, 3 sizes of plates, plus saucer, cups, sherbets, butter dish, shakers, and multiple tumblers. Our best estimate of start date here is about 1947, and it was sold into at least the late 50s or possibly early 60s. Here are some examples of the advertising and also the prices of pieces from catalogs and newspapers. The 1948 Dupuis Frere catalog at the center here featured the full complement of pieces produced in the pattern with the exception of the rare flat-bottomed tumbler. Several of the ads show swirl being sold as the glassware to accompany Chinaware sets of plates and bowls. The cups and saucers in this pattern are harder to find than in most tableware patterns. We're not really sure why this is. It could be that it was only produced for a few years, or perhaps they broke often due to hot liquids, so maybe the glass was not entirely heat safe. By comparison, this in Saguenay pattern, the cups and saucers are probably the most often found item today. As one of its main lines for such a long time, we know Dominion experimented with the swirl pattern in a few different ways. It's not really clear when exactly these color variations were made, but based on the use of some of these colors in other Dominion glassware for kitchen lines like Starburst and newspaper ads for those pieces, it seems likely it was either just before or around 1950. You can see here pieces in fired-on colors of swirl have been found in yellow, a sort of delphite or pastel blue, and a deeper cherry red color. These are hard to find, if not rare. I have seen plates in the red color for sale online. There are also rare pieces in cobalt blue transparent glass. I believe only the sugar and creamer have been found, and they are very rare, so it seems like they were probably experimental. The large photo grouping here is from the Wallaceburg Museum's collection. A variation on the swirl Canadian swirl pattern has alternating stippling in the swirl design. Several different sources suggest that this was a later variation to cover up mold damage as the swirl molds were getting older. However, I have a pretty large collection of the stippled swirl, and that seems odd to me as the mold imperfections would have had to be pretty symmetrical to make the design of alternating swirl bands possible. The stippled swirl pattern line is made in fewer pieces, really only serving pieces rather than luncheon and dinner items. I was gifted the sherbet dish on the right a few years ago. This was a piece I had never seen before. It came from a friend and had been passed down through family. Here we can see the comparison between stippled swirl on the left and regular Canadian swirl on the right. You can see the alternating swirl bands with stippling where I have indicated with the arrow. That brings us to perhaps the most mysterious pattern of Canadian glass tableware of this era. There are a few reasons for this mystery. There are multiple kinds of glass production. The maroon example is fired on over clear glass. The others shown here are over a white glass base, quite similar to platinite from Hazel Atlas. The handles are also different. At left, you can see where I'm trying to show the handles. The maroon one has a chunky tubular style handle, the same as used for Canadian swirl cups and saucers and creamer and sugar handles. The other handle design is narrower with sharper edges, similar to but not exactly the same as the handles for Saguenay and Hiawatha. Also on the bottom, the maroon cup, there's mostly a plain bottom with just a circle rim design. The others have an imprint of the same design as the central part of the Saguenay pattern, which actually was an initial clue when I was finding them that they might be by Dominion Glass. But even that pattern is just in the very middle of the imprint on the bottoms of the sugar and creamer, as you can see with the inverted turquoise sugar bowl in this photo, especially if you contrast it with the orange cup that's just left of it. There are also multiple color series, so most of my collection is more of a 1950s color scheme, turquoise, lemon yellow, and this orange or rust color, but there also seems to be a color scheme with other colors. The creamer at the front here is a chartreuse yellow color, almost approaching lime green. The match to it seems to be a maroon colored sugar bowl, either the same or similar color to my cup. This color series strikes me as a more of a late 30s or maybe mid 40s colors. There are also examples of what appear to be clear pieces of this pattern in the 1940s Dominion catalogs. And I have seen a set of creamer and sugar in clear with gold banding on one online seller site. That distinctive Saguenay design is imprinted on the bottom and it has the same handles as my turquoise creamer. Apologies for the quality of this image. It was taken in a display at the Wallaceburg Museum. I was trying to get some photos of the plates, which also confused me quite a bit. They are very, very similar to the platinite plates in the Ovid pattern from Hazel Atlas. I still haven't completely got it straight as to which is which when I see one online for sale. Dominions are not marked as far as I can tell, and many of Hazel Atlas's aren't either. The collector from Quebec I mentioned earlier has noted that there is a distinctive though subtle difference in the plate edges. Here are some examples of ads from Prairie Canadian newspapers from 1949 to 1952. The top two reference one color series, including the yellow and orange rust color, and the bottom left one references the chartreuse color. I haven't found one yet that references the turquoise color. Here's a Dominion catalog image of what appears to be Acadia from the late 1940s. It is not listed by the Acadian name, only line numbers, and the examples are clear glass. Anyway, Acadia is still a mystery for me. I'm still on the hunt for more evidence to identify dates and whether this could actually constitute more than one line or pattern, perhaps. Now we're moving to a line of kitchenware items that collectors often refer to as starburst because of the round raid design that you can see on the refrigerator dish bottoms shown on the left. The line includes nested bowl sets, both regular and rolled top mixing bowls, as well as lidded refrigerator dishes and a rectangular butter dish with cover. Here from left to right is a newspaper ad featuring Starburst kitchenware as part of a larger grouping of items for setting up housekeeping, as it says. At the center, Starburst in a department store catalog from Quebec, and on the right, some of these items listed in the Dominion catalog's kitchen glassware section. Starburst also came in fired-on colors. I didn't know this at first, but I finally did find a newspaper advertisement which showed a picture of mixing bowls and mentioned red, yellow, and green colors. This red fired-on mixing bowl was sold to me as Hazel Atlas. I saw it for several months at an antique store, and it intrigued me and I couldn't figure it out. Finally, it dawned on me that it matched clear mixing bowls that I already had, but was a color variation. I have since then found fridge containers in fired-on blue, as you can see here, and I have also seen yellow and red ones for sale online. If you have any familiarity with Depression-era mixing bowls, you might notice similarities of these Dominion mixing bowls to Federal Glass, which is the amber example here, or even to other U.S. glass producers like Hazel Atlas. The bottoms are nearly the same, but the ridges don't go all the way to the foot like on Federal Glass's examples. And there are 2 rows of ridges, so a distinctly Canadian design by Dominion. And now we have a pattern called Spiral. This is a servingware line that we have found had some pieces in production back into the late 1940s. 2 of the divided serving plates, a large and small version, were produced for decades, and they are probably the most commonly found Canadian glass at thrift stores, at least in my area. Nearly every trip, you see one or even a pile of them on the shelves. I actually had one of these dishes, pickle dishes, in my cupboard for pickles at the holidays for years, and it was only when I connected similar-looking items I was finding with that dish that it clicked. I then found catalog images when I visited the Wallaceburg Museum a few years ago. Here are some of those other pieces that I found. That pitcher that is in the left picture is a particularly unique shape. And here are some of those catalog pages showing the different kinds of pieces found in this spiral pattern. As mentioned, some of these items were produced over decades, with 30 years separating the 2 images on the right. In later years, under Libby St. Clair, the divided plates that I mentioned were being sold simply as the hors d'oeuvre line. This was highlighted in some detail in Conrad's research. We now have evidence that Dominion produced some pieces in the cube or cubist pattern, which was a Depression-era glass pattern originally made by Pennsylvania-based Jeanette Glass. Jeanette also made some pieces in this design in the 1950s, as well as a creamer and sugar were made by Hazel Atlas in the 1950s, based on several sources. We know that Dominion made the cubist bowl as early as 1939 because of an ad listing a, quote, Dominion glass fruit and salad bowl as a laundry soap premium, which is the ad that's shown on the left on the slide. One of my source books from Thomas King references Dominion's production of cubist pieces as premiums in the 1950s and said that they made a deal with Jeanette Glass of Pennsylvania, where Jeanette would make the pink sets, Dominion would then make the clear sets, and then they shared distribution in Canada for the company that ordered them, with some customers getting the clear Dominion item and some getting the pink Jeanette one. It doesn't really say if this arrangement was reciprocal, meaning Dominion clear sets being sent to the US customers, but that seems possible. Here is documentation showing that Dominion referred to the pattern as cubist and not cube, which was Jeanette's name for this line, as shown in the late 1940s and 1957 catalogs. This pattern was a mystery until a few years ago. A collector from Calgary was posting about this glass she was finding and asking for identifications. People said that it looked like anchor hawking patterns from the 1950s, but not quite right. Some of us Canadian collectors chimed in that we were seeing it too in thrift stores. The squared handle shapes and square bowls give it a mid-century style. I happened to be flipping through some photos from my first trip to the museum in Wallaceburg, and one of the pieces in a photo was of this design. The collector was then able to connect with the museum curator in Wallaceburg and confirm the identification. So we finally had a name, Sunburst, and understood more about the full line of items. Here are the Sunburst catalog images from that the museum scanned from 1964 on the left and 1966 on the right. Sunburst also comes in a stippled variation. In this case, with overall stippling, it does seem more possible that this one was an adaptation to moldware. Another common pattern to find in thrift stores is this one. I had been seeing this design for years when I was out in the stores, and finally on a trip to Wallaceburg, I found the creamer and sugar shown here at the museum gift shop for sale. So that confirmed that it was Wallaceburg produced. On a later visit, I was able to find the catalog information that this pattern is called Classic. It also comes in a bowl set and a few other serving pieces and was made into the 1980s and possibly early 90s at Libby St. Clair in Wallaceburg, which explains why we find so much of it at thrift stores here in my area. And here's that line shown in the Libby St. Clair catalogs from 1978 and 1979. One last notable pattern. This one is usually listed in catalogs as colonial. There are a few other pieces, such as the bowls you can see in the catalog images here. There's a ray design in the bottom of all of these pieces. These show up in some of the 1920s catalogs for Dominion, and some of the serving pieces show up again in the 1960s and even into the Libby St. Clair era after 1978. In the last month, I was messaging with a specialist in glass creamer and sugar sets who is based in the US about these colonial patterns. She wasn't aware of Dominion's colonial pattern, and I shared the catalog image. We came to the conclusion that my example in this photo is likely not Dominion, but probably is Indiana glass based on the number of panels, so I'm still on the hunt for a Dominion example. I couldn't do a survey of Dominion glass without mentioning the many styles and types of salt and pepper shakers they made over the years. The ones in this photo stretch from the 1920s and 30s up to the 70s and early 80s. A few of the patterns we reviewed earlier had salt and pepper shakers, most notably Saguenay, but they came in crystal only with usually red plastic tops, and swirl and stippled swirl, which are usually found with red or salmon pink plastic tops, or occasionally with metal tops. Dominion shakers were used by several other companies that did glass decorating, such as Cutler, and for souvenir items like the Edmonton and Hamilton examples that we see here. And here's another photo of those same shakers showing some of the same ones in the 1940s Dominion catalog and a distributor catalog from the 1930s. We also can't end the presentation without a few photos and a mention of the vast array of commemorative and advertising tumblers and all sorts of other tumblers that were made by Dominion, all out of the Wallaceburg plant, and most using the applied ceramic labeling ACL process. As it says here from the museum display, the use of ACL on tumblers goes back to 1936, when there were 6 available colors: red, yellow, green, blue, white, and black. Here are some more tumblers from the museum's collections. And more tumblers from my collections. Just like in the US with Swanky Swigs, which is the name used for small glass tumblers made by Hazel Atlas, some of Dominion's tumblers, especially from the 40s to the 60s, came with food in them, such as cottage cheese and peanut butter. Others were sold in drink sets, sometimes with matching pitchers. You could certainly do a whole presentation, and probably several of them, about Dominion tumblers and drink sets. And so we're going to end it here for now. If you have any questions about my sources, I've listed them here. I'm always open to learn more information, hear about any corrections or suggestions you have, or avenues for research. Thanks for joining today. I also want to share a special thanks to the Wallaceburg Museum, and especially to curator Kaylin Gregory.